Exactly. He's got a bar complaint already.
But
There's a pending bar complaint against him too for conflicts of interest.
against Blanche,
Yeah.
where's he licensed?
I think in New York.
Okay.
You know, Bondi's got.
Right.
You read about that.
Yeah. Yeah, are those still ongoing?
Yeah, they've been renewed. Like, you know, two Supreme Court justices, Florida Supreme Court justices, are signed on that complaint,
Jeez.
including. I mean, court is such a horrible court, but Barbara Perriente, I think, is one of the two.
Is she still on the court?
No, but these are former
That's okay.
former ones who signed on to the complaint. She's got bar issues.
She does.
Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Carey. I'm very happy to be with you this morning on Thursday morning. I know we're also on Friday evening and on YouTube as well. I'm very honored to have with me as my guest this morning, Chris Griffin, who's a personal friend, close friend, mentor, former law partner at Carlton Fields, as well as one who's been very active in politics over many, many years. Also defensive back from Florida State football team. Chris, welcome.
Great to be here and great to see you, Kevin.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you here. One of the joys of doing this show is to have people like you who we'll have a very intelligent discussion about many issues that are currently out there. It's never a dull moment. The first issue I want to talk about, it's something we've talked about several times recently, is the gutting of the Department of Justice. With Todd Blanche being the acting Attorney General, but the number of assistants U.S. attorneys that have left is just staggering, and I'm sure you're aware of that.
Absolutely. That have left on the basis of principle. I no longer will be a part of an organization that pursues, quote, justice, unquote, this way. But those who've been terminated involuntarily because, for instance, any assistants, as I recall, who were involved in the investigation or prosecution of January 6th defendants were told to hit the street.
Yeah, I've never understood that, given that was a valid prosecution. And we have a president who then pardoned these serious felons.
All of them.
They were, people died that day. And I've never understood how the MAGA people who purportedly are law and order think that's okay.
Well, there was a stark example of that recently. One of the congressional hearings before Pam Bondi left, she was testifying, and one of the members of the committee quoted her saying, "If you go after the police, we go after you." So then he put up a clip of a person using a flagpole on January 6th to attack an officer. And, it's like cross-examination in the courtroom. Is that person going after the police? Well, yes, he is. Well, do you know who that person is? I don't. So the congressman names the person and says he was convicted for crimes, and you hired him for the Department of Justice 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And
right.
she had to admit that she had, but her excuse was, well, Trump pardoned him, so the prior crimes essentially don't exist.
I think with this administration, things that are happening that have never happened before. You and I have been around the track quite a few years now. We have almost 100 years of experience as lawyers, which is hard to believe. But what is abnormal may seem normal to people. We both have children, adult children, and I wonder if my children think there's a normalcy to this. But this Department of Justice has become Trump's personal law firm.
Right.
Where you've got an attorney general who must be a sycophant to him. And that's not how the process is supposed to work.
Not at all.
And I don't know how long it's going to take once this corrupt administration is gone for us to get back to some normalcy.
Well, that's the question across the board of all the things that that the Trump administration has done to the administration of government. in all the departments. How long will it take us to get back to what we would call normal? And if I may, Kevin, make a point about this subject regarding the Department of Justice, what they have done and what they are in the process of doing is turning the criminal investigation and prosecution process upside down. What do I mean? Normally, something happens, the police, investigators collect evidence. Based on that evidence, they determine that a crime was committed. Based on that analysis, they determine who to charge for the commission of that crime. In this administration, it's reversed. They first identify the person, say that's the person we want to go after, like Jim Comey, and this is the crime with which I'm going to charge that person. And now let me go find the evidence, or try to find the evidence to support that charge. Totally flipped on its head. And that's why so many of their prosecutions are failing, because number one, the judges know that the reason the charge was brought in the first place was political retribution. And number two, many times the charge is levied and there's no evidence to support it. So the cases get dismissed. But that, and I heard commentary on this some time ago, that puts in stark relief what this Department of Justice has done to our administration of justice.
Well, Liz Oyer, who's a former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, we have on there every week, had some comments very much along the lines, Chris, of what you just said. Yeah, Liz is, we have her on every week. She does a good job with telling us these are facts, these aren't opinions. And
Yeah.
it's again, the word unprecedented was one that you could use pretty much with every fact given. And Chris, I know, with your practice, you were often in federal court. I know your father was a circuit judge. I was a circuit judge. I clerked for federal Judge Carr back in the 80s. The U.S. Attorney's Office did have, there was pride when that person stood up and said, I represent the United States of America.
Yeah. And I was in that courtroom, or those courtrooms, with the U.S. Attorney back in the day, because I represented a media outlet at the time, and many times we were arguing with the government about whether the press could have access to certain proceedings. And you're right, we could stand up and speak to the judge, as we always did, but when the U.S. attorney stood up and spoke, it had more gravitas. And that came with the imprimatur of the Department of Justice, which is what you're talking about, which we've now lost.
Yeah, we're going to have on here Roger Handberg in a few months. Roger, who was the U.S. attorney and was an advisee, wasn't my advisee at Carlton Fields back in the 90s. But and he, frankly, Roger wanted to wait a few months before he came on. But it's just, you don't, when you look at this Trump world of how things occur, it's nothing like what the reality has been for the last couple of years. Or last couple centuries. Speaking of Comey, we do have some thoughts from him. He has been targeted. As you mentioned, the judges are now dismissing cases. There was a case dismissed against Comey last year already.
Correct.
They didn't get the evidence. One of the problems that's been occurring is that they're improperly appointing these U.S. attorneys and avoiding the time frames and the requirement to go through Congress. And
plus, if I may, in that instance, I believe one of the issues was that this completely inexperienced person took the case to a grand jury, and the judge asked to see the transcripts of what was presented to the grand jury, and that very inexperienced lawyer said two things to the grand jury which were completely impermissible.
Right.
And that was one of the other bases upon which he dismissed the lawsuit.
Yeah, that's correct. And it is unusual for grand jury proceedings to be released because they are generally confidential. But when the situations where a judge perceives there's misconduct,
right,
the judge can release it, which is what happened. And there have even been cases where grand juries have even rejected some of these proposed indictments.
Which is remarkable because, as you know, Kevin, the old bromide is you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich.
That's right. And apparently Trump and his personal law firm of DOJ has proven that that's not necessarily the case. Well, let's hear it from our friend, Mr. Comey. Well, James Comey, that case is never going to get to a jury. This is an embarrassment. And Chris, we're lawyers, and I hope people understand who are not lawyers. There's something about being a lawyer. You're subject to the bar, and to the really more so than the bar is the Florida Supreme Court.
Right.
But there are standards when someone says to you, client, let's say, do something. I remember going to a seminar one time, Chris, and a lawyer said to me, and I was a young lawyer at the time, and I've always remembered this: no one client is worth your bar license or your reputation.
Right.
It makes the newspaper, and so what's happened with this department now, and I would blame Pam Bondi. I don't know what caused her to be fired, but maybe she wasn't a sycophant enough, and Blanche will be. But Blanche was on Meet the Press last week, and he said to the host that was an independent U.S. attorney in North Carolina that, after year-long investigation about these seashells, determined independently that there should be an indictment, and the grand jury went forward. So for you to believe that was not Trump telling him to bring that indictment, I've got some swampland in New Jersey for you.
Well, you're right, and one of the things that we might talk about in a little bit more detail later is the fact that I think 48 hours ago, Trump sent 55 social media posts over the course of 5 hours, close to the middle of the night. And one of the posts was again criticizing already Todd Blanche for not going after Trump's enemies quickly enough or with enough enthusiasm. Again, the man is tweeting about this in the middle of the night. But going back to the point I made about going after the person before you go after the evidence, he is telling them, and to your point, this is so remarkable for those of us who take seriously our oath as lawyers to the Florida Supreme Court. It is so remarkable to see a situation where the leader of the government is telling the chief prosecutor, I want you to go find something to charge this person with. And that simply cannot be allowed to continue, period.
You know, I mentioned on this show a few weeks ago the number of attorneys that were Trump attorneys who have been disbarred and or indicted. And it's quite a large number, including Giuliani, who's been disbarred from New York. And as I said, others have been indicted. But one of the problems with Trump is this abnormalcy, if it goes on long enough, appears to be normal to the public. And I'm very careful, by the way, to say MAGA, not Republicans. I have some very good Republican friends who do not support Trump, who have listened to our show and made that point to me. So I want to make clear that these are MAGA people. There are Republicans like my brother who, there's a bridge too far. It's one thing when it's John McCain, when it's Mitt Romney, you can, or even W. Bush, or certainly H.W. Bush, Nixon, even Reagan. This is not what's happened here. And when I have friends of mine who say with this Trump derangement syndrome, which is to me a very offensive term, it's about this man's character. It's about what he requires. It's a cult, and it doesn't work out well. Michael Cohen made that warning when he was testifying as he was heading off to his federal prison in New York, that it doesn't turn out well. Everything he touches.
Yeah, and going back to your point, Kevin, which I've thought about a lot. As you mentioned, you and I have been around the block a few times, both as citizens and as lawyers. And look, you can make light of it and say that it's Trump whack-a-mole. That he does something over here, boom. He does something over here, boom. And we are becoming numb to it because it never stops. It's several things every day that are done that are completely antithetical to the American system of governance and judicial system. And we cannot allow that to happen. That being so numb that we don't respond to these things in a way that demonstrates that they're wrong and that we will not stand for them. I have 3 grandsons. I don't want them to grow up thinking that this that we're watching is how the United States government should work. When I was their age, I was reading Teddy White's The Making of the President. I bought them some books about the Declaration of Independence so that we can talk about it between now and July 4. And I want them to have the same reverence for the American system that I developed through my father, principally. You mentioned was a judge ultimately. But we cannot allow our young people to believe that this is the way things should be.
I have 3 grandsons as well and 2 children. And have a family of public service too. I mentioned my grandfather was the Attorney General of New York. My father was a 2-star general. So I come from a family of service, and it meant something. And I remember, and my father was no liberal, but before he passed away a few years ago. But when he would hear the word Trump, he'd get a look on his face that I've never seen before. And thankfully, he wasn't alive for the second coming of Trump. When he had passed away, and he would ask me, because he was getting confused toward the end of his life in his 90s, he would say, "Did Trump win against Biden?" I said, "No, Dad, Biden won." He goes, "Oh, thank goodness."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's just, and you're right, Chris. It's something, and you and I are very similar. We have very strong values and a commitment to our community, And our children, if they want to think independently and
Of course.
to have a policy discussion,
Of course.
I'm a big fan of John McCain and Mitt Romney and Reagan and the Bushes, but that's not what's happened with this administration. It's corrupt, and we could talk about this. We could easily talk 8 hours today.
But if I may,
sure.
I want to make another point
Sure.
because I consider it to be very important because I care for, love my grandchildren. I do not want them, not only do I not want them to grow up thinking that this is the way the US government should work, I don't want them to grow up thinking that the way Trump and his people talk to other people is the way we should. Trump, as you know, as everyone listening to this, I assume knows, will attack reporters, usually, if not exclusively, women reporters. Low IQ, you're dumb, you're worthless, you have no idea what you're doing, only when they ask a question that he doesn't like. And look, I watched Lyndon Johnson, I watched Everett Dirksen, this certainly dates me. And those people, look, I watched the Watergate hearings and it was partisan, but they never let the partisanship get in the way of basic human decency. And that's what's happening now, and that's what I do not want my grandchildren to think is normative behavior.
And I think we have an obligation to speak out and speak truth to power. And and we've talked many times on this show about the polls, and we'll talk about polls in the next hour. But I mean, the polls are not looking very good for Trump. And I want to change gears quickly to Iran, which is not going well. And I've got an audio which is going to go on for a few minutes because I think it's important. That was an unprovoked war, and which we had no reason to get into. There's no exit strategy. There was never any initial strategy other than what several people on this show believe was a distraction from Epstein, the old Wag the Dog movie we've talked about before. But in the meantime, it's costing billions and billions of dollars, basically $1 billion a day. They've gone back. The estimate was 25 billion. Now it's up to 29 billion.
Yep.
And
it's not going to go down.
No, it's not going down. And there's no exit strategy for Trump. The word is that he's bored with this. And Trump is a child. He doesn't have any capacity to analyze anything. He doesn't read, and he doesn't have. Unlike Trump one, he at least had a few people who then would resign or be fired because they would put up with his behavior.
Right. And they knew it was dangerous.
Correct. And what's happened with Iran, and we could talk again, spend 2 hours all day on Iran, is they've now decided they have the power to monopolize the Strait of Hormuz, which was never the case before.
Never before. Yeah.
And has created an economic crisis, global economic crisis. By the way, we had under Obama a very good agreement that Trump threw out in his first term, which allowed for inspection. Prevented them from going forward with nuclear capacity.
Right.
I mean, Trump would now give his left arm for what we had under Obama.
And he ripped it up literally day one of his first administration because he did not want there to be lingering over his foreign policy an instrument that Obama had created. It was that simple, and he ripped it up.
So he's not even where we were under Obama years ago, and it's a very unpopular war. Let me be very clear: this war has never been popular in the polls.
Nope.
Nothing that anything he's doing now is popular. And I mentioned last week, and I'll mention again. What does a Republican say when he or she goes to the podium for re-election this summer? What can they say that's positive? The economy is in the tank. 3.8% inflation, which is the highest it's been in years. Well, let's go back to Iran for a moment. I wanted to play this audio. Yeah, and that he went on further than that, but I thought it was important to convey that. I mean, it's funny. Trump yesterday, when he talked about it, he said he didn't really care about the financial situation that people are suffering through. He's focused solely on that Iran not have nuclear ability. Well, that was not there wasn't an issue. The thing I talked about Trump. Trump takes credit for putting out a fire that he started. There was no Strait of Hormuz issue, which is now he's blockading the blockade.
Right.
But how's he going to solve that? You've now got Iran in a position
of strength that it never had before, even close to having before.
And there was absolutely where
Yeah.
they did. Gosh, we've got this ability now to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. We didn't know we had. That tools in our toolbox. And what happened? Israel went to Prime Minister of Israel, went to Trump and pushed the issue. There were a few advisors, including the Secretary of State, who thought it was a bad idea, but Trump went ahead forward. He doesn't have an exit strategy now at all.
Well, let me make a further comment on the point you just made. First of all, as I've observed many times, the way to look at this writ large, Trump does not have policies. He has whims, and he operates on those whims depending on the direction in which the wind is blowing, if you will. Maggie Haberman and David Sanger at the New York Times did a terrific piece, very detailed. I think they'll get a Pulitzer Prize for it, about how we got into the war in the first instance. And as you were mentioning, Netanyahu came to the United States. He was in the Situation Room, which I don't think has ever happened before with a foreign head of state. His war cabinet was on the video monitor, and they presented a war plan, so to speak, that had 4 components. We decapitate the regime. We destroy or severely limit Iran's war-making ability. Number 3, we initiate a popular uprising to take over the government. And finally, number 4, you don't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz. Nothing's going to happen there. Reportedly, Trump's response in hearing this presentation was, sounds good. The next day, he had a meeting of just himself and his senior advisors, and they all agreed, yes, we can decapitate the regime. We all know what happened on day 1. Yes, we can severely limit or destroy their war-making ability. We've done that, not to the extent that Trump claims, but we've done it. And then when they got to the point about this will initiate a popular uprising, and you don't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz, to your point, the director of the CIA said to Trump, those claims are farcical. Secretary of State Rubio then said, that means bullshit. And I mean, you don't have quotes like that in reporting unless you've got pretty reliable sources who told you that's what was said.
Yeah, the cabinet, there's no one there that can speak to him. And,
no.
And there's an incredible fact that I want to mention. The vast majority of cabinet members in Trump 1 did not endorse him in 2024.
In fact, his vice president called him America's Hitler.
Well, that's true. In fact, of course, he was looking at his life being, I don't think Trump would have cared if his life had been ended on January 6th of 2021. But my father was in the Vietnam War. He was a fighter pilot. He flew 151 combat missions over Southeast Asia. We don't take war lightly. People have already died. We've had, he bragged about the rescue. Rescue was fine, but again, there should never have been the need for the rescue. In the meantime, you've lost a $100 million fighter jet. Those F-15s are not $10. And what's happened with Iran, and this is what's happened with Kuwait and the Soviet Union, or Russia, which Trump doesn't seem to care about either.
Not at all.
With democracies, he's a big Putin fan. He'll do whatever Putin wants him to do. But these cheap drones are knocking out these expensive, the warfare that we're using.
Which is how Ukraine is
absolutely
able to withstand the onslaught from the Russia.
So you've got Trump begging, and not know who to go to because you've knocked out the first tier. Now you've got the son. You think he's going to be more reasonable when you've killed his father?
So the Revolutionary Guard, with which he is closely associated, is now running the country. And Kevin, the point you make about, look, war is serious. What a grand understatement that is. My father served in the Pacific in World War II, aboard a ship that was used in MacArthur's island hopping campaign. And the way we have entered this war without popular support, without any consultation with the populace or the Congress, is tragic. Nothing short of tragic.
It is, and one of the things my children both they went to Christ the King Catholic School, and in eighth grade they'd go to Washington D.C. for a field trip and go to the War Memorial.
Right.
And there were names of people that I knew that had worked with my dad who were killed, and I would tell them the name, and my son and daughter would literally go
at the Vietnam Wall.
Yes, and see the name, and it Trump, who lied about some bullshit foot injury to even avoid service. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't understand anything about war, and he thinks only in economic terms. Iran is not motivated in economic terms.
No.
And we've on the show before talked about the long history that this country has had with the Shah and whatnot with Iran. But there's nothing right now that concerns them about what we're doing.
If you recall, because you used the term economic considerations, actually I think it's more accurate to think of Trump's view of matters, both domestic and foreign, as transactional. What can I get out of this particular event, incident, negotiation? If you recall, he actually seriously floated the idea that Iran and the United States would jointly control the Strait of Hormuz and would accept tolls. He said that it would be the U.S. and Iran. Of course, it was dismissed out of hand, but he says those kinds of things.
That's how he thinks.
Right.
I mean, in Gaza, he sees that being another Atlantic city.
Right.
How you develop. Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm Kevin Carey with my co-host Chris Griffin. It's time for a short break, and when we return, we'll open the phone lines a little bit later and talk about other issues, more of the issues which conservatives never want you to hear about.
You okay so far?
Yeah, good. That's great. Yeah, I think he's got the audio going, so it's good.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He told me the first thing he said, give me a little more feedback. That's why I put the second one. And I think it's great. You're doing a great job.
It's good. It's good.
I think I think this is great.
And you realize you can't say bullshit?
What?
You realize you can't say the word bullshit?
Yeah, I heard you the first time.
You did and you did. So next time I just go to mute.
I don't think is that barred by the FCC?
And I was quoting.
It's not banned by the FCC. He's not a pleasant guy.
You want to put money on that?
I don't care to.
The second.
He's nothing.
So we're going to move on to just do your job. The election-related issues we're going to talk about, the redistricting, and I think part of that's going to be about they're losing on these issues, so
right.
They have to cheat, kind of thing. So
and I might get a little too into the weeds on the Supreme Court decision, but I think it's important to try to break it down a little bit.
Yeah, and I've given us until the 10 o'clock hour. So and I've got audio from Mark Elias, who's the
I know Mark Ribble, and there's something I want to say at the 30,000-foot view about because I think if somebody's listening to this, the negative cast of everything, and I want to kind of give a counterpoint to that.
Actually, our guys talking on this. Yeah. Okay, we're back. This is Kevin Carey here with my good friend and fellow attorney, Chris Griffin. I want to move to a topic that we talked a little bit about last week, but it continues to be an issue. I think those of us on the progressive side, understand that the only way that the Republicans, at least the MAGA Republicans, are going to survive in November is through cheating and voter suppression. That's the reality. And consistent with that is, as you know, Chris is a lawyer. There was a significant U.S. Supreme Court case we talked about last week a little bit out of Louisiana, which pretty much gutted Section 2 of the Civil the Civil Voting Rights Act. And then, of course, Florida jumped right in and redistrict. And now Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, I think, decided not to. James Clyburn, who's the representative who pretty much saved Biden's campaign
Right.
in 2020, and
Right.
is a very respected, longstanding representative. His district would have been in jeopardy. But I think South Carolina, for the time being, is backing off. But what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I don't want to get too much in the legal weeds, but I think we have to talk about how this case came to be. And as you noted, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and it has a long history, but that history is highlighted by the fact that the statute was reauthorized 4 different times by Congress. That's important because this is a Supreme Court that always defers to the legislative branch, whether it's federal or state. This is for the people's representatives to decide, except when that branch, in this instance Congress, 4 times, reauthorizes a statute, the result of which they disagree with.
Including W. Bush.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Republican.
Yeah, and the point is that you had the 15th Amendment, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of race in voting. The 65 Act was an implementation of the 15th Amendment. And for years, as you know, there was a common view that when redistricting occurred, there needed to be a system by which minority districts could become majority minority, so that minorities could be almost assured of having some reasonable chance of having representation in the legislature. Now the court, and it was based on the effect of the redistricting. What is that impact on minority voters and minority voting blocks? This court has now said that no longer matters. The only way that a party can show a violation of Section 2 is to demonstrate that a redistricting was inherently and specifically based on race. The effect, the impact, no longer is the test. Well, you and I both know nobody ever admits that they're committing fraud. Nobody ever admits anything.
Yeah, they never have bad intentions.
They never say, "Oh, I did it because I wanted to make sure that minorities couldn't gain representation." And again, when you step back and you think of the history after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment, and then Lyndon Johnson having the Voting Rights Act passed, it served a great purpose. And I don't like to say this, but I guarantee you after the next congressional election, you will have so few African-American representatives in Congress compared to what we have now. And to make this even worse, the court said long ago that it is permissible. Now it's saying now you cannot redistrict based on race, but it is permissible to redistrict based on partisan lines. So it's A-okay for the redistricting authorities to decide that they want to draw the map in a way, and that's what they've been doing, that will completely advantage the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party is overrepresented in the legislatures and elsewhere based on their standing in the community, the numbers of Democrats versus Republicans. And again, I caution, I didn't want to get into the weeds, but perhaps I am. But
it's hard not to.
It's impossible not to. But the point is that gerrymandering is what got us here, which is that a minority of this country is running the country because of gerrymandering, and it's only going to get worse.
Well, you're right, Chris. And let's remind people that generally speaking, the census is done every 10 years.
Yep.
And it's really good. But again, Trump goes to Texas, right? And his suckers in Texas. I mean, we want you to. I need, he
I need 4 seats.
Yeah, I need 4 seats, and because he knows he's in trouble. The number one, generally speaking, the out of power party picks up seats, and it's a few seats. And so they kiss his ass like all the MAG people just kiss his ass. That's your primary criteria. It's certainly not qualifications.
Mhm.
And then, California or Newsom says, well, two can play this game, but actually better than that, at least they went to the voters. There's actually was on the ballot, and so that took care of that. And Virginia comes into play and again puts it on the ballot, unlike Florida, unlike Texas, which just has the cronies in the legislature that don't even go to the people. And we'll talk about in a second about what Florida did was unconstitutional. But Virginia votes in favor, and which gave added seats. I don't know whether it was 3 or 4 more seats. I think
it's more than that.
I think it made it 10-1 in Virginia, which is a fair, it's not as large as Florida, but it's a decent state. And the state Supreme Court on a 4-3 comes back and says, well, that's not allowed. We don't have time to get into the reasons for that, but you've got one state justice has driven this issue, and they're now stuck with what it was before. But then you've got what that has done is encouraged other states like Tennessee and Alabama,
yep,
as well as the U.S. Supreme Court was in Louisiana, which, by the way, there was a policy that you do not ever enter a ruling that's going to affect a current election. Ballots had gone out in Louisiana.
And not only gone out, they had been cast.
That's what I mean, voting.
Yes. And I know that there was a 4 in it. I don't know if it's 40,000 or 400,000, but there was a major number of voters who had already cast their ballots. They interviewed the governor of Louisiana, who did exactly what you just said. The decision came down, and it was a decision that came from Louisiana politics. The second the court struck what Louisiana had done earlier, which is create 2 majority-minority districts, he said, well, we don't have to do that anymore. We're going to redistrict solely on partisan lines, and these votes that have been cast will be disregarded, thrown in the trash can. Now, you know well the impact that can have on election. People say to themselves, well, I've already voted. I don't need to vote again. Or they say, well, this is going to happen to me again. I'm going to take the time to vote, and it's going to get thrown out. It suppresses greatly people's interest in voting, and that's what they did in Louisiana.
And it was contrary to precedent. I mean, I love how these nominees come to the Senate Judiciary Committee and they all, honor. They say they'll commit to precedent, and they reverse Roe v. Wade. The strong precedent about getting involved, in these elections. We're going to hear from Mark Elias in about 3 or 4 minutes, who's the primary Democratic attorney that's done a wonderful job. He's got 60, 70 pending cases right now.
I met him in the 2000 recount battle.
Yeah, he's an impressive guy. But when you're just hypocritical, what happens, and this, when you're a hypocrite, you lose, you have no respect given to you, and that's why what's happened. The Supreme Court of the U.S. now has one of the lowest ratings of any body, right down there with used car sales.
Yeah,
literally. And that was not the case in the past. There was respect. John Roberts, I criticized quite a bit. I think what's happened with Roberts, Chris, is now that the 6-3 has occurred, he's lost any motivation under the
to try to bargain the justices to come up with a middle of the road.
Absolutely, which is part of what I think he's an embarrassment, let alone some of the other, Thomas and some of the other Alito on the court. And now, given the fact that his vote, although he's the chief justice, he's only one vote at a 6-3, it doesn't really matter. And I've read quite a bit about the fact that he was a big fan of this civil rights.
He was,
being abolished. Yeah. So, there's such a major change, which, let me be clear again, is not what the majority of this country wants. Over 70% of this country wants choice. It was against what happened with Roe v. Wade. The vast majority of this country is against gerrymandering. So what's happened is this, and is again part of this MAGA Republican strategy of it's minority rule. You get judges in place who can, in essence, do what the majority of the public does not want you to do. And so you're looking again at a situation with these elections, which is unprecedented. Now, there's a term, dummymandering, which suggests that.
Never heard that one.
What's that?
I've never heard that.
Yeah,
one.
that term is that there's unintended consequences.
Right.
So, for example, people are saying in Texas, you assume all these Latinos are going to go Republican, and they're all pissed off now because of all these illegal deportations.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to Florida, which now has jumped on the bandwagon. And by the way, the day that this decision came down, they took literally 20 minutes to look at it. DeSantis misrepresented what the opinion was to the state legislature, saying that it banned any consideration of racial consideration, which it doesn't. It makes it certainly much harder,
Right.
as you mentioned, but it doesn't.
And
ban
doesn't
any
Florida have its
consideration.
own constitutional provision against partisan gerrymandering?
Exactly right. We passed a constitutional amendment, the Fair Districting Amendment, about 10, 15 years ago, which prohibits what they're doing now. So, what's going to happen? You've got 6 DeSantis appointees on this court of 7. So, again, how do you have any respect for the rule of law? And again, you and I both are lawyers and have come from families of lawyers where you did respect the
Right.
law.
And you respect the rule of law,
Absolutely.
which is the most important. And I know you're going to pull up Mark Elias, but if I can have 60 seconds to make a point,
Sure.
Because I'm thinking if someone is listening to our discussion, they might think, oh my gosh, everything is going south. Everything is about our governmental norms being destroyed. What hope can I possibly have? And when I get into these discussions, I refer immediately to the courageous people of Minneapolis and what they did. If they had not pushed back against the immigration enforcement, that's what we want to call it, that happened there, that would have spread across the nation like wildfire. But they didn't stand down. They stood up. And my point always is we have a norm to which we can return, and we will. But it's going to take all of us who are upset with what is happening now to let all the rest of us know you're not alone. And if you want to fight these battles, I've got your back. And that's what the people of Minneapolis did for us writ large. And I think on the micro level, we just need to remind each other that we're not alone and we'll have each other's backs.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. And we've talked about it on the show many times. There are many courageous federal district judges who have stood up on these various issues we've talked about, illegal deportation, lack of any due process. You know, I used to want to make a list or keep a list to talk to my Republican friends and go, does it bother you?
Right.
And that list is over 200. Does it bother you that there's no due process, that these people are being, shipped off to these foreign countries into gulags? Does it bother you that they're dropping bombs on these fishing ships or even drug ships off of Venezuela, nowhere
Right.
near the United States? That's not legal.
Nope.
It's not even a war crime because we're not in a war with Venezuela.
But it's illegal because if that person on that boat, think about it this way, if that boat pulled up to a port or a beach in Fort Lauderdale or Miami and stepped off the boat, it would be blatantly illegal for a law enforcement officer to walk up and shoot him in the head.
That's
Can't
exactly
do that.
right.
But that's exactly what's happening on the open seas.
Well, that's exactly, it's murder is what it is. That's not even a war crime because we're not at war, it's murder. And yet they brag about it. The numbers are staggering now. These boating drug ships, they're just blowing them out of the water, including, people that are in the water.
Yep, trying to get rescued.
Trying to get rescued. It's just, when did this become okay, Chris, to act this way?
It's not okay.
And it's not okay. And you're right. And Elias is going to talk in a second about some hope here. We're not going to put up with this. And I'm proud for my children to see me fighting, and saying, this is not right. I'm not going to put up with this.
Right. Exactly.
It's not about politics. It's about character and a democracy.
And the Constitution.
Absolutely. And they do matter. And I think this is a nightmare. And the fact this country would reelect this clown twice is just staggering to me. And I think we're going to have some positive results in November, but for this voter suppression and this redistricting shenanigans going on.
Yeah.
But let's take a minute to listen to Mark Elias. Everything he said was accurate.
I'm glad he's on our side.
Yes. All right, we'll take a short break for national and international news, and we'll be back after that.
How long will we be down? How long will we be down?
5 minutes. You're good.